The first red flag in my new apartment building wasn't the peeling paint in the hallway or the rattling elevator, it was the welcome basket left on my doorstep. It was filled with perfect, beautiful, soil-free vegetables, along with a handwritten note. "We're so happy to have you. Your garden plot is waiting." I'd been in my new apartment for exactly 3 hours, most of which was spent wrestling the sectional sofa through a too narrow doorway. I hadn't spoken to a single soul. The gesture was nice, but also a little weird. The vegetables, a plump, ruby red tomato, a sleek, dark zucchini, and a handful of crisp-looking lettuce leaves, were immaculate. Not a speck of dirt, not a single blemish. They looked like props from a commercial. And the note, written in an elegant, looping script, felt oddly presumptive. "My garden plot is waiting." I didn't know I had one. "I'm Sarah. I'm a 26-year-old freelance graphic designer, which is a fancy way of saying I spend 8 to 10 hours a day in my apartment, staring at a screen and talking mostly to my cat, Jasper." I'd moved to the city for a fresh start after a bad breakup, hoping to find a sense of community, or at the very least, a decent coffee shop where the baristas might remember my name. The apartment building, the Arbor, wasn't glamorous, but it had great light and, apparently, a very proactive welcoming committee. The rooftop garden had been a major selling point. The online listing showed a lush, green oasis perched atop the 6-story brick building, a little slice of paradise in the urban sprawl. I'd pictured myself up there, laptop on my knees, sipping iced tea and maybe, just maybe, making a friend or two. The next morning, armed with a healthy dose of caffeine and social anxiety, I made my way to the roof. The door creaked open to reveal a space even more impressive than the pictures. Raised wooden beds were arranged in a meticulous grid, overflowing with vibrant, healthy plants. String lights were crisscrossed overhead, and in the center, a small patio area with comfortable-looking chairs surrounded a communal tool shed. It was idyllic. A handful of people, maybe 5 or 6, were quietly tending to their plots, their movements synchronized and serene. It was almost like watching a ballet. "You must be Sarah." The voice was warm and smooth, and it came from a man who matched it perfectly. He was tall, with sun-streaked brown hair, a friendly, crinkle-eyed smile, and an honest-to-God dimple in his left cheek. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that showed off lean, toned arms, and his hands, though holding a small gardening trowel, were clean. This was David. He introduced himself as the organizer of the community garden. "I'm the one who left you the basket," he said, his smile widening. "I hope it wasn't too forward. We get excited when a new neighbor moves in. It's a chance for our little family to grow." Family. The word hung in the air. A little intense for a first meeting, but his charm was disarming. I stammered something about how thoughtful it was and how amazing the vegetables tasted. He beamed, a proud father showing off his prize-winning kids. "We pride ourselves on what we grow here," he said, his eyes sweeping across the rooftop with a proprietary air. "It's all about care, consistency, and the right ingredients." He led me to a small, empty plot at the end of a row. It was a perfect square of dark, rich-looking earth, identical in size and shape to all the others. "This one's yours. Ready for you to make your mark." He handed me a set of brand new, shiny gardening tools, a trowel, a cultivator, and a pair of gloves. They were exactly the same as the ones everyone else was using. "We provide everything you need," he explained. "Tools, seeds, soil, guidance. All we ask is that you follow the program." "The program?" I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, just our little system," he said breezily. "It's how we get such great results. Everyone plants the same things at the same time. This cycle, it's heirloom tomatoes and basil. Keeps things simple, you know, harmonious." I looked around. He was right. Every single plot was a mirror image of the next, neat rows of tomato plants, staked with identical wooden dowels, and bushy basil plants nestled at their feet. It was less a community garden and more a botanical army standing at attention. The obsessive neatness, the uniformity, it tickled the part of my brain that knew something was off. But my desire to connect, to be a part of something, was stronger. I wanted that idyllic rooftop life. So, I smiled and thanked him, ignoring the little alarm bell that had started to ring, faintly, in the back of my mind. The soil in my new plot was dark and slightly damp, crumbling between my fingers with a texture like coffee grounds. It had a strange, almost sweet smell, earthy but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. It was probably just some fancy organic compost. David gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before he left me to it. "Welcome to the garden, Sarah. I have a feeling you're going to fit right in." His words were meant to be reassuring, but as I watched him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed up for something much more than planting tomatoes. The first week was a blur of forced friendliness and horticultural indoctrination. Life at the arbor revolved around the garden, and David was its son. He was always there, offering unsolicited advice with that blindingly charming smile. "Angle your trowel just a bit more, Sarah. The roots need to feel secure. We water at sunrise and sunset. The schedule is on the shed door. Consistency is key." He wasn't just an organizer, he was a guru, a conductor, and the other residents were his devoted orchestra. I tried to make small talk with my fellow gardeners. There was Martha, a retiree in her late 60s who always wore a pristine white sun hat, a young couple named Ben and Chloe who held hands while they weeded, and a quiet, intense man named Arthur who rarely spoke. But my attempts at connection were always gently deflected. I'd ask Martha about her grandchildren, and she'd steer the conversation back to the optimal pH balance of the soil. I asked Ben and Chloe if they'd tried the new taco place down the street, and they just smiled vaguely and told me that the tomatoes we were growing would make a far superior salsa. Every conversation, every interaction, was a boomerang that flew right back to the garden. David's rules became more apparent and more intrusive. They weren't written down anywhere, but they were enforced by a system of gentle corrections and communal disapproval. You were expected to spend at least an hour in the garden every day. Missing a day would earn you a friendly check-in from David, knocking on your apartment door with a concerned look on his face. "Everything okay, Sarah? We missed you up there." He said it with a smile, but his eyes were calculating, and the question felt less like concern and more like a warning. One afternoon, I brought my laptop up to the roof, hoping to get some design work done while I put in my hour. Before I could even open the file, David was at my elbow. "We try to keep the rooftop a tech-free zone," he said, his voice still pleasant but with a new, firm edge. "It's about connecting with the earth, with each other. Not with that." He gestured dismissively at my MacBook. I felt my face flush with embarrassment as I saw Martha and Arthur glance over, their expressions unreadable but distinctly disapproving. I mumbled an apology and packed it away, feeling like a scolded child. The creepiest rule, the one that really started to freak me out, was about personalizing our plots. I'd bought a small, colorful ceramic gnome, a silly little thing I thought would add a bit of character to my identical patch of green. I tucked it behind a basil plant, smiling to myself. The next morning, it was gone. In its place was a small, smooth, gray stone, exactly like the ones that marked the corners of every other plot. I looked around, confused, and saw David watching me from across the garden. He gave me a slow, deliberate shake of his head. The message was clear: individuality was not welcome here. We were a collective. We were a family. My loneliness, the very thing that drove me to the garden, was starting to feel like a fond memory. Now, I felt watched. I'd be working in my apartment and get the distinct, skin-crawling sensation that someone was observing me. The garden was directly above my unit, and I started hearing faint scraping and shuffling sounds from my ceiling at odd hours of the night. Probably just raccoons, I told myself, but I didn't believe it. The pressure to conform was immense. I found myself dressing like the others' simple, earth-toned clothing. I started using the bland, organic soap that was provided in the communal laundry room. I even started to parrot their garden-centric phrases without thinking. The turning point came one sweltering Tuesday afternoon. David had called a mandatory community meeting on the rooftop. Attendance was not optional. He stood before us, radiating that familiar, unsettling charisma. He was talking about the upcoming harvest, about the celebration we would have. Then he said something that made the blood in my veins run cold. He started talking about a former resident, a guy named Michael. "It's a shame Michael had to leave us," David said, his expression one of profound sadness. "He just wasn't a good fit. He didn't understand the meaning of commitment. He wanted to take from the garden, but he didn't want to truly give himself to it." He paused, letting his words sink in. The other gardeners nodded in solemn agreement. We had to let his plot go fallow. We had to turn the soil over and start fresh. He looked around, making eye contact with each of us. "This garden is a commitment, a permanent one. When you join us, you're putting down roots. You don't just get to pull them up when you feel like it. That's not how families work." A cold dread washed over me. Permanent. It sounded like a threat. Later that evening, my curiosity morphed into a gnawing, terrified need to know more. Who was Michael? What happened to him? Under the cover of darkness, long after the others had retired for the night, I snuck up to the rooftop. The tool shed was locked, but I'd seen where David kept the spare key, tucked on a ledge above the door. My hands were shaking as I let myself in. The shed was immaculately organized, tools hanging in perfect rows. In the corner, there was a small filing cabinet. I pulled open the top drawer. It was filled with files, one for every resident. My name was there, a new manila folder with Sarah P. written in David's perfect script. I flipped past it, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I found it, Michael H. The file contained his rental application, a photo, and a few pages of notes. But tucked at the very back was a small, laminated card. It was a driver's license. Michael's driver's license. Why would they have that? My eyes scanned the photo, a young man with a hopeful smile. I flipped it over. And then I saw it. Taped to the back was a small Ziploc bag. Inside was a single, brownish object. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was a human tooth. A molar with a small silver filling. My stomach lurched. I slammed the drawer shut, my mind racing. Let his plot go fallow. Turn the soil over. What was in this soil? What had they done to Michael? The sweet, earthy smell of the garden suddenly seemed cloying, rotten. It was the smell of decay. I stumbled back to my apartment, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The tooth. The damn tooth. It played on a loop in my mind, a grotesque symbol of what this place really was. This wasn't a community, it was a cage. David wasn't a charming organizer, he was a zookeeper, and we were his prized specimens. The phrase "putting down roots" now had a horrifying, literal meaning. I had to get out. But the line from David's speech echoed in my head: "You don't just get to pull them up when you feel like it." This wasn't going to be as simple as packing my bags and breaking my lease. My friendly, trusting nature had been a liability. Now, I had to be something else. I had to be observant, resourceful, and above all, invisible. I needed a plan. My freelance work, once a source of my isolation, was now my greatest asset. I had a legitimate reason to be glued to my computer at all hours. The first step was to play the part of a model gardener. The next morning, I was on the roof at sunrise, a bright, eager smile plastered on my face. I watered my tomato plants with performative care. I complimented Martha on the vibrant green of her basil. I asked David a series of inane questions about fertilizer soaking up his praise like a dying flower. See, I knew you'd fit in, Sarah, he said, patting my arm. The touch felt like a brand. I had to fight the urge to recoil. While I tended my plot on the outside, I was digging for my life on the inside. At night, my apartment became a command center. I started by researching Michael H. A few clicks and I found his social media profiles. They all went dark about 3 months ago, right around the time I now assumed he'd left the arbor. His last post was a cheerful photo of his own tomato plants on the rooftop, with the caption, "Finally getting the hang of this gardening thing. Hash roof the pardon hash city life." The comments were all from his family, asking where he'd been, why he wasn't answering his phone. My blood ran cold. He hadn't left. He'd been composted. Next, I needed to know about the soil. That sweet, cloying smell was my obsession. I discreetly scooped a sample into a Ziploc bag one afternoon, hiding it in my pocket. I found a soil testing lab in a neighboring state that I could mail it to, no questions asked. The cost was exorbitant, but what was money compared to my life? I filled out the form using a fake name and sent the package from a post office 5 towns over. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. Every smile felt like a lie. Every conversation about companion planting was a performance. David's attention seemed to intensify. He'd bring me a special compost tea he'd brewed himself, watching me until I drank it. It tasted bitter, and I'd have to force it down, praying it wasn't laced with anything. He'd find reasons to come to my apartment to check on a supposedly leaky pipe under my sink, to see if I needed help hanging a picture. He was testing my loyalty, checking for any signs of dissent. He was a predator, circling his prey, and I had to convince him I was a happy, docile little sheep. My escape plan started to take shape. I couldn't just disappear, they'd come looking for me. They had my personal information from my rental application. I needed to create a plausible reason for leaving. A family emergency. My a-hole ex-boyfriend was a web developer, and for all his faults, he'd taught me a thing or two about spoofing emails. I spent a night creating a fake email chain between myself and a fabricated cousin, discussing our mom's sudden, dramatic turn for the worse. I needed to go home, immediately, to take care of her. It was a flimsy story, but it was the best I could come up with. I started quietly packing, a little bit at a time. A box of books here, a bag of non-essential clothes there. I sold my larger furniture online for cash, telling David I was embracing a more minimalist lifestyle inspired by the garden's simplicity. He bought it. Or at least, he seemed to. "That's wonderful, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes gleaming. "Shedding your old attachments. That's the final step to truly becoming part of our family." The email from the soil lab arrived a week later. I almost deleted it, afraid of what it would say. My hands trembled as I opened the attached PDF. It was a complex chemical analysis, most of which I didn't understand. But I scrolled down to the summary section, and 4 words jumped off the page: high levels of adipocere. I didn't know what adipocere was, so I googled it. My heart stopped. Adipocere, commonly known as grave wax, is a waxy substance formed during the decomposition of fatty tissue in anaerobic conditions. It's found on bodies in moist, airless environments. Like being buried. Like being tilled into a rooftop garden plot. I gagged, stumbling to the bathroom just in time. The vegetables. The beautiful, perfect vegetables in my welcome basket. The ones everyone grew and ate. We were eating Michael. And God knows who else. My plan had to accelerate. Now, I couldn't spend another night in this mausoleum. I booked a one-way bus ticket for the following night, under a different name, leaving from a station across the city. I packed a single go bag with my laptop, my hard drives, Jasper in his carrier, and the few personal items that mattered. The rest was replaceable. That evening, I went to David, my face streaked with fake tears, my phone in my hand, displaying the faked email from my cousin. My voice shook as I told him my mom was in the ICU. I had to go home. Right now. He listened, his expression a perfect mask of sympathy. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt more like a cage. Oh, Sarah. Of course. Family comes first, he murmured into my hair. We understand completely. He pulled back, holding me by the shoulders, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles. But you'll come back, won't you? Your plot will be waiting for you. Of course, I choked out. As soon as I can. Good, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Because we've all grown so attached to you. He released me, and as I turned to leave, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, drive safe, Sarah. The roads can be so dangerous at night. Things happen. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. He knew, or he suspected. And he was letting me know that leaving the arbor wasn't going to be that easy. My apartment felt like a tomb. The partially packed boxes seemed to mock my chances of escape. David's parting words, things happen, echoed in my ears, a thinly veiled promise of violence. He was playing with me, letting me think I had a chance, enjoying the terror he was inducing. Sleep was impossible. I sat on my sofa, Jasper purring nervously in my lap, and watched the sliver of light under my front door, expecting a shadow to fall across it at any moment. Every creak of the old building was David coming for me. Every distant siren was my own future. My bus left at 3 a.m. My plan was to slip out at 2:30, when the building was likely to be at its quietest. I had my go bag by the door, and I'd wedged a chair under the knob, a flimsy defense that offered more psychological comfort than actual security. Around midnight, a piece of paper slid under my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept over and picked it up. It was a note, in David's elegant handwriting. We're also sorry to hear about your mother. We're having a small prayer circle for her in the garden. Please join us. We want to support you. It was a trap, a summons. If I didn't go, he would know for sure that I was lying. If I did go, I might never leave that rooftop again. My mind raced, searching for an out. There was none. I had to go, but I wasn't going to go unprepared. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could think of, a solid glass award I'd won for a design project. It was hefty, with a sharp, pointed corner. I slipped it into the deep pocket of my hoodie. Then, I grabbed the can of pepper spray on my keychain. It felt pitifully small. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and headed for the roof, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The rooftop was eerily quiet. The string lights cast a soft, gentle glow, making the scene look peaceful, belying the horror I knew was rooted in the soil beneath my feet. David was there, standing by my plot, his back to me. Ben, Chloe, Martha, and Arthur were there too, standing in a loose semicircle. They weren't praying. They were just waiting. As I stepped fully onto the rooftop, the door clicked shut behind me. Arthur had been waiting behind it. He slid a heavy bolt across it, locking us in. Sarah, David said, turning around slowly. His face was devoid of its usual charm. What remained was cold, reptilian. We're so glad you could make it. But we know about your mother. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? She's fine, he said simply. I called the hospital in your hometown. They've never heard of her. He took a step toward me. You were going to leave us, Sarah. After we welcomed you. After we gave you a home. A family. You were going to just pull up your roots. The others started to close in, their faces blank, their movements slow and deliberate, like zombies in a trance. Ben and Chloe were no longer holding hands. Their arms were slack at their sides. Martha's sun hat was gone, and her gray hair seemed to glow in the dim light. They were carrying their gardening tools, trowels, cultivators, even a pair of pruning shears in Arthur's hand. They weren't tools anymore. They were weapons. "What did you do to Michael?" I demanded, my voice shaking but loud. David smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Michael didn't appreciate the gift he was given. Just like you. He tried to leave. We couldn't let him poison our community with his ingratitude. So we asked him to make one final, permanent contribution." He gestured to the plot at my feet. "My plot. He's the reason your tomatoes are so sweet this year." My stomach heaved. This was it. There was no talking my way out. I backed away, my hand closing around the glass award in my pocket. "You're insane," I whispered. "We're a family," Chloe corrected, her voice a monotone. "We provide for each other." They lunged. It wasn't a frantic, messy attack. It was coordinated, practiced. Arthur came at me from the side, the shears snipping the air. I dodged, swinging my go bag and knocking him off balance. Ben and Chloe grabbed for my arms. I sprayed the pepper spray in a wide arc, catching Ben square in the face. He screamed, a raw, human sound that broke the spell of the night, clawing at his eyes. David was the real threat. He moved with a terrifying grace, grabbing me and wrestling me towards my open plot. His strength was immense. He was forcing me to my knees, pushing my face down towards the soil, Michael's soil. I could smell the sweet, rotten earth. Panic gave me a surge of adrenaline. I twisted, bringing my knee up hard into his groin. He grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all I needed. I pulled the glass award from my pocket and swung it with all my might, the pointed edge connecting with the side of his head. There was a sickening crunch, and he collapsed, silent, onto the ground. The others froze, staring at their fallen leader. The spell was broken. Their god was bleeding on the patio stones. That was my chance. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with a heavy bolt. It slid open with a deafening screech. I didn't look back. I flew down the 6 flights of stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time, Jasper's carrier banging against my leg. I burst out of the building's front door and ran, not stopping until the sirens I'd called on my way to the roof were screaming in the distance. I never went back to the apartment. I left everything. The police took my statement, but I know they thought I was crazy. A weird cult of gardeners. A guy composted into the soil. They found David, conscious but concussed, and the others, who claimed I had attacked them in a paranoid frenzy. They found no tooth, no files, no grave wax in their preliminary tests. David and his family had covered their tracks well. Without a body, my story was just a wild accusation. I moved thousands of miles away. I live in a small house now, with a big yard. People ask me if I'm going to start a garden. The answer is always no. I can't even stand the smell of fresh soil anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the arbor. I think about the perfect, soil-free vegetables. I think about the residents still living there, tending their plots. And I wonder whose plot they're turning over now, and whose face I'll see on a missing person poster next year, smiling, with the caption, "Finally getting the hang of this gardening thing." I got away, but I know, deep in my bones, that a part of me is still buried on that rooftop, in the roots of a tomato plant, reaching for the sun. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.